This is Jamie Dyer welcoming you to another edition of the Quo-Cast. Happy New Year to you. If you're listening to this at any other time of the year, then hello to you. On this first episode of 2022, I'm joined by Slade historian Chris Selby, who's here to talk about the book that he co-wrote, which is great. It's a discography of the finest band to come out of Wolverhampton, possibly ever. We'll talk about a lot of the crossovers as well, including, I'm sure, the tours of the early 70s alongside Quo, that Christmas song, and a few other things that I'm sure that you will be thinking of. Tush. Anyway, welcome to the podcast, Chris. Tell me, what we normally do here is I ask people how they got into Status Quo, but I'm going to ask you, how did you get into Slade?
It's in the book. Easily. I just happened to live about a mile away from Noddy Holder's parents, and I moved into big school, senior school, in September '69. And as a big adventure, I lived in a place called Bloxwich, and we went to Warsaw, which is a bus journey, 20 minutes or so. And we were going past Noddy Holder's house, which I learned later. And there were these four skinheads, might have been three, but there were definitely some skinheads outside his house. And it all transpired. And they said, oh, they were a group, and they're called Slade and things like that. And when you're 11, 12, you have a bit of a survival thing. So you're all skinheads, remember that. But then in this week in 1970, one of my mates said, oh, that skinhead group are playing locally in the village which I now live. So Lord knows how we did it, but we managed to get from Bloxwich to Aldridge. We saw them. I've no idea what they played, no idea anything at all. Protection again, there were all these big chaps with skin and things like that. And that was it. And then I saw them a few times around locally. They'd play our local swimming baths, same like the Quo did in the early days, the youth clubs, that sort of thing. And then all of a sudden, within 18 months, so on top of the pops, with Get Down and Get With It. And it was that Slade, and that was it. And then it just carried on. Good times, bad times. I think I saw them on every tour. There's lots of people who can claim, probably in the Status Quo land as well, that they saw them 80, 90 times and all that. I didn't. I saw them every year. They do a yearly tour. I'd see them on every tour, so it'd be 15, 16 tours. And they were just tremendous, and collected all the albums, got all the singles, even during the bad times. And that was it. It just stayed. It was purely geographical.
Interesting. I'm not sure that anybody's ever said that on this podcast before, that because they're basically a local band for you, which is a very old, that's an old thing, I guess, of you go and see your local band, and your local band happens to be Slade, of all things.
It's like the Beatles things playing the Cavern. All the people who went down to see them couple of 18 months, 2 years before they got the Brian Epstein deal and all that sort of stuff. They were. I mean, there were other bands as well, but Slade, I think it was the skinhead thing was appealing, and the noise, it was just noise. It's like Quo, it sort of jump up and down, lots of noise. Oh, it's very quick. Oh, it's a twiddly bit. Oh, he's a drum solo. It's a save. There's nobody going to argue that there was any sort of 15-minute guitar solos or anything with Slade, because it was just bam straight into it. And they got a violin as well, which sort of was slightly intriguing. They did things like Martha My Dear, again, which didn't really fit in with the skinhead image, but it was good to see that they were using that. And obviously, Because I Love You, the first number one, was Violin Based.
which, when you listen to later recordings, seems quite a shock. I remember getting a greatest hits of Slade, and that does kind of stick out a little bit as an unusual track. Were they finding their way, or was that kind of an oddity?
Jim Lee, the bass player, was sort of classically trained violinist, so it was what he did. That's why his bass playing is quite unusual. It's sort of a bit all over the place, sort of Jimi Hendrix. He plays it like a lead guitar. It's not just A, D, A, boom, 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 boom. You listen, he's right up the top of the neck, doing all his bits and pieces. But they had lots of sort of things where they had to gel. I mean, it was 66, they all got together, but there was no chart success until 71. So they got 5 years of being able to know what they were doing. They knew how to get a crowd going. They know what all the little bits and pieces. They had to do adventures in the Bahamas for 6 months where they had to do, 8-hour shifts and all that sort of stuff. So they knew what they were, much the same as Status Quo. They knew what they were doing. They weren't just a boy band who put together and said, do this. They had to play the bread and butter stuff, the youth clubs and the baths. I mean, I did some stuff for Status Quo. Andy Poulter it is now, for his book, the gig thing. Because my thing is looking for old gigs, and I was coming up with Status Quo gigs for him. And they were doing the same. They had that sort of doldrum period, didn't they, where they had pictures of Matchstick Man, and they were Top of the Pops and all the fancy gear and all that sort of stuff. And then they went into a lull, and Slade picked them up and took them on tour. And within 6 months, they were back in the charts again, same as everybody else.
So are you saying that that Quo have something to thank Slade for?
Yes, definitely.
Because
yes,
they ended up touring Australia and New Zealand, didn't they?
That's right. Took them out there. They took them on. They took them on tour 72. Then 73 they went to Australia. Paper Plane got into the charts after they'd been on tour with Slade. I bought it because I'd seen them. I knew who they were. I saw them at Top Rank, I think it was, in Birmingham. And I liked them. And when the single came out, I bought the single. Same as I bought Thin Lizzy. Same as I bought Sensational Alex Harvey Band. Slade took all those out. And they did. Thin Lizzy did fairly well out of it. Susie Quatto did fairly well out of it. So we can say, slightly tongue-in-cheek, Status Quo did. Because they were, was it Dog with Two Heads, was it? The album?
Yes, it was, yeah.
And they weren't setting the world on fire. I know they were working. They were gigging and they were selling out and all that sort of thing. But I think they needed that slight elevation of going out on a national tour again with a child band, which Slade were, being subjected to a Slade audience, which is like a Quo audience. They're not very forgiving. And they had to work for it, and they did it.
Yeah. So while we're here, you've actually interviewed Francis and John Coughlin for your sort of podcast that you do with Don, the drummer of Slade. And how was that? Because you were talking about obviously the early 70s, and you said before we came on here, they went on a tangent, which they did.
Excellent, which is what we want. I think we started talking about 1930s Flash Gordon serials with Francis, and at one point we did what was it, Everly Brothers' Wake Up Little Susie. So there's a rarity for somebody. Me and Francis Rossi singing Wake Up Little Susie. That'll be bootlegged somewhere. And John as well. It was sort of, it's as we were speaking, you have a beginning and an end, and somewhere in the middle, it can go anywhere. And the Francis, we spoke about America, the management, where it went wrong with both. Really, why Quo didn't really make it in America. Slade didn't make it until the 80s when MTV came along. They went sort of, and it was all down to Francis just said it's down to management. It was quite right, but he was interested, and John was equally as interested. Unfortunately, purely by coincidence, it was the week that we lost Alan, which was quite weird because I'd interviewed half of Status Quo as far as I was concerned, and then that news came out. So sad, but the way it is. But they were good. Francis was funny, and John was funny, and John, being a drummer, was a fairly, like Don, they're fairly sort of drummers. But Francis, I say, we just went off, and I think we spoke a little bit about the tour, but not more. The idea was to talk about the tour, but that got kicked into touch.
Yes, that does tend to happen in interviews. I can certainly testify with that. That's happened on here a few times. What I should mention is obviously you've written a book. You've sort of collated a book with Ian Edmondson, who's written a couple of other Slade things. It's called The Noize, the Slade Discography. Now, it came out 2 or 3 years ago. How did you get involved in that?
Basically, I got a phone call. I've always done the research. 20 odd years ago it started. Just for the gigs, I wanted to do. Nobody else had done it. Started collating the gigs, and that started. Noddy Holden bought his book out, and he was saying certain things. And I was thinking, I know this, I know that place, I know that. I'll just investigate, and it just went on to there. And so I started collating all the gigs from 62, the earliest one, up until when they finished in 81. 84. So that's how that came about. So I was known for doing the research, basically. And Ian had decided he wanted to do a discography, not tell the story of the band, but just to get every UK release that we knew about and stick them in a book. Pictures, words, dead easy. Took us about 12 months, and we managed to do it. And 95% of the records in there we owned between us. So that was okay. And we got a few other people who said, blah, blah, we got this. And great, we'll use it. So we published it. We published it through Amazon. It's a self-publishing thing, which in our mind is great because it doesn't cost us anything. If it's people order it, they buy it, and it comes out, and that's it. It came out, and I think it was the next day, people said, you haven't got included this. And we said, why didn't you tell us about, we've been doing this for the last 12 months. We've been asking for people, and people said, oh, no, you haven't got this one. So we did an amended copy, and then we've done a few. And then December time, we decided to do the second issue. And by then, Amazon had done this thing where you could do it in hardback. So you can there's a choice on Amazon for either hardback or paperback. It's the same book, but the covers are different designs. And that was it. And the decision was that we'd try and write the book that we'd buy. I'd buy the book. If somebody else wrote it to the standard that we did it, I'd buy it. And that was what we wanted. No sort of, cutting any corners at all. I think there's 300 pages in this one. And it is basically pictures of records and explanations. It tells the story of the group as well, because it has to, but it's not a biography or an autobiography. You have to put things into context, where they were, what they were doing, and things like that. So and John Powell had this accident, so that we have to include that and what the consequences of that were, and that sort of thing. But it's interesting, and find a few things out. You do. I mean, if you like records, it's great because it's just got pictures of records.
And what did the band make of it?
They loved it. All totally unofficial, but they loved it. It's great. I met up with Jim. They all got copies of it and got some fantastic feedback. We thought we might get a little bit because it's all unofficial. The management loved it, the band loved it. We're not going to argue. We take it. They found things out they'd forgotten because obviously all they do is make the record, is put out obscure little acetates and promo discs they don't know anything about unless they collected them themselves, and I don't think any of them did. There was no sort of interest in the product.
No, I think that's quite a common thing with artists. I don't think they tend to sort of collect their own work. Why would they? They've recorded it. It's out there. Yeah. So I think it's fair to say that the most well-known lineup of Slade is Noddy Holder, Dave Hill, Jim Lee, Don Powell, as you've already mentioned. And that band broke up in 1992. Is that correct?
Yeah. They sort of struggled. They didn't do anything for quite a few years. The last time they appeared on a stage was at Walsall Town Hall for convention. That was 1991, and that was sort of the swan song. After that, that was it. So I think Slade 2, as they were, which was Don and Dave and other people, started in 1992 and carry on up until this day. And there's just Dave Hill with other people, musicians now. But they've been going, what's that? Probably longer than the original lineup. So,
well, people still turn up, don't they? They still go to the gigs.
Yeah. They still want a night out. They still want to sing the songs. They might get a bit surprised when they see that there's only Dave there, because you get people who expect to see Noddy Holder still. He's not been with them since 30 years ago, but people still expect it. But this was it. No, yeah. So in the book we cover all there, but the later incarnations didn't really release or haven't really released too much, but it's all in the book. And Don's solo things, Jim's solo stuff. Nod's not really done anything. And Dave's little bits of solo bits and pieces. It's all there. Yeah, but the main thing is Noddy, Dave, Jim and Don. It's the thing, the classic lineup.
Yeah, and so I know this is really hard because you've written a book and it's obviously very extensive, and with Quo, it's not black and white. I don't think it's black and white with any band, really. They go through many different eras. How would you describe kind of their musical journey from, say, that chart period to the early 90s when they made their last recordings, as you call it, the classic lineup?
Well, I mean, the early stuff, the 60s stuff, they were always very tight. Ambrose Slade, they did the Beginnings album, which is a great album. Lots of covers, but it's a good, tight little album. And then the first proper, in quotes, Slade album, which was Play It Loud, is a fantastic album. There's a lot of people who tell you that's the best Slade album ever made. And it sounds nothing like Slade. Because it was, the songwriting dynamics are different. It wasn't the classic whole Jimmy Lee and Noddy Holder thing, who wrote all the number ones and everything like that. But then the next album, Long Slade, is the one that people say that's the greatest. After Slade Live, people say that's the greatest live album ever made in the world ever. And not just Slade fans, they'll say nobody can beat Slade Live as a live album. Other people argue you can, but it's up to them. Then Slade came along the album, and that's classic Slade. That's the standing in front of the mirror with a tennis racket album. That's when you 70, they were top of the tree. You couldn't beat them. And it went on, and they changed, they evolved. They were always sort of, a very loud band. It's such a hard. I don't know the technique of trying to get it onto to record. If you listen to some records and the band will wipe your ears off live, but you put the record on and it's, oh yeah, this is very good. First Def Leppard album. Just sort of what, if you ever listen to the first, I bought the Bludgeon Fall EP when it first came out, and I went and bought the album, and it was just tinny. It just wasn't. There was no bass. There was nothing. Slade always managed to get that sound on. But as they evolved into the 80s and all that sort of thing, there was a couple of synthesizers introduced. Jimmy Lee took over the production. There was John Punter did a bit of one of the albums. So they evolved, but there was always the live thing which they could fall back onto, and live they just were fantastic.
And that's where the crossover, I mean, there are a lot of Quo fans, I'm sure, listening to this going, that's basically the Quo story. Yeah. And I think it's the story of many bands. You know, there's a lot of crossover there. The fact that the live album by the classic lineup, to use all the terminology, is considered to be one of the finest things that either band has recorded. The thing with synthesizers in the 1980s seems to be quite obsessive, you know, like it's part of the moment. I mean, the other thing as well, I know that my dad was a relatively big Slade fan as well as Quo, and he used to play over and over and over again, Runaway.
Yeah.
Right? That one song. And to be honest, Quo down the years, certainly in the last sort of 20 years, have got this thing about like Irish jigs and stuff.
Yeah.
And Slade, that's basically their contribution to that. But I'm sure there are a lot of things in their catalogue that have that same kind of feel to them, that party kind of, Irish jig type thing.
Yeah. Well, that was what the Runaway got to number 2 in America. It broke them in America. They did a video, East North Castle, I think it was, and they got a guy tossing a caber, and the group dancing about, and a crowd dancing about. And he was MTV. He was on sort of non-stop, and the Americans all thought that they all lived in this castle, as they do with most English people. We all live in these castles, and he got number 2. You know, sort of, and it wasn't a typical or atypical Slade song, but he's got the drumming and the synthesizer coming in, and then, you know, all the bits and pieces, and it was a very, very simple song.
Do you think, though, that perhaps they were helped a little bit by the success of the Slade covers by Quiet Riot?
Oh, yeah.
You think that helped?
Tremendously, yeah. Because they go there and people say, why are you playing Quiet Riot singing songs? And they said, no, Quiet Riot are playing Slade songs. And I think Jimmy Lee's favourite quote is that he got sent a cheque for a stupid amount of money, and he had to phone up with the accountant. And he said, oh, it's America, it's Quiet Riot. It's their 2 cover versions. And then, you know, Quiet Riot thing is, when's your next Slade single coming out? You know, sort of. Yeah, of course. I mean, it's great exposure. You know, you're in America, and all of a sudden, you've got this band putting your songs to number 1 twice. So the interest, obviously, the record companies and things must say, "Oh, there's something going on here. Let's get the band over," which they did, and they got a decent record deal because, you know, they hadn't got a deal as such. And they did Runaway, which isn't, as I said before, isn't a typical Slade song by any means. And but it got into the charts number 2 because of the MTV things. I mean, no doubt Quo would have, if pre-MTV, you had to go over there, you had to do all your touring and everything like that. And if you didn't make it, you were just throwing money down. So MTV, you could produce a video for a couple of £1,000. And that's it. That's all you needed to do. You didn't need to tour. it'd just be on constant loop. So they were happy.
Yes. And I'm sure I've heard somewhere that early MTV was very populated by British bands because the American labels were not quite sure about this new medium.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. I don't think we had MTV. It was a foreign thing. With sort of I didn't really listen to it. I was probably working and doing stupid things like that. But yeah, it makes perfect sense that the English bands went over there and broke it big purely because of that, because nobody was bothering. But no, it's a strange old world. That's the best way of saying it, I think.
I'm sure I've read, certainly while we're talking about the early 80s here, we should mention that a certain member of Slade appeared with Quo on Top of the Pops while performing Margarita Time. Do you know the story behind that?
Not really, other than he was... Did Alan not turn up, or?
I feel like he might have refused to promote the song.
I get that impression, and they were on Top of the Pops together, and they were obviously mates. And if you look at the video, Jim sort of keeps in the background, and he's just plonking away, pretending to play the bass. And then Rick does his thing. His falling over act, say it. And as you say now, that's a classic piece of Top of the Pops history. And it's sort of Jim sort of standing looking slightly bemused by it all, sort of thing. Whether or not it was planned or not, I don't know.
Do you know how many appearances Slade made on Top of the Pops? Was it quite a few? Because they were known, weren't they, for being quite loud.
Yeah, they were. All the story to get talking to people who've been on Top of the Pops is you went to the Slade dressing room because that was where they got the booze. And, they managed. They were friendly with the doorman. John tells tales of them, slip him a pint and the security, and you could have, it was literally a party in their dressing rooms. But no, there's probably people who beat them. You Shaking Stevens and people like that of this world who, were. And several top 10 hits, but Slade are certainly up there, and they do it. They enjoyed sort of doing, by all accounts, they enjoyed going to the BBC and doing the little bits and pieces, and they always put a performance on. Like the Quo. I mean, they all put a performance on. They might not have taken it seriously, but they knew it was there to sell records. So, and then. In the olden days, Top of the Pops was the thing to do. If you got on Top of the Pops, you were guaranteed at least 10 places going up the next, because people go to the shop the next day and buy the thing. I think with Slade, they had the 6 number ones, but none of them were huge, long. I mean, 3, 4, 5 weeks. Maximum. They weren't these things that lasted 7, 8 weeks, 17, 18 weeks, all bang, 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 all the time. But they certainly racked up a few appearances.
Yeah, they were quite a regular, I think, on Top of the Pops, certainly in the early to mid 70s. Now, obviously, Quo have had many big hits, some of which are their best known songs, things like Caroline, Whatever You Want, Down, Down. But the one song I think they'll never get away from is Rocking All Over the World. Now, when I look at Slade, obviously the one song that comes to mind for me is Merry Xmas, everybody.
Yes.
What is that's the correct name, isn't it? It's not Merry Christmas, everybody.
It's Xmas, isn't it? But nobody says Xmas. It's Merry Christmas, everybody. And the lyrics is Merry Christmas, everybody. And so here it is, Merry Christmas, and it's Christmas at the end. It's always Christmas. Nod doesn't shout. It's Xmas. I mean, who does?
But that's the other thing. That is the thing. We're going a slight deviation. The fact that Slade used to misspell their
Yeah,
songs, which
yeah.
must have confused not only radio DJs but the public at large.
Well, back in the days when we were youth, there was an education thing, an English education, a system of teaching, almost like a phonetic thing, which at about the same time as "Cause I Love You" was coming out, and "Take Me Back Home" with "back" was B-A-K and "cuz" was C-U-Z and all that sort of stuff. And it was a legitimate thing. My sister was taught it. My sister is about 4 or 5 years younger than me. And in early 1970s, she was being taught this way of how to spell. When she got home, my dad used to say, "That's rubbish. But this is how you do it properly." So, but it got people talking. They got the headlines. I mean, and that's all it was. It's all good. It's very good publicity, So it's all little gimmicky things. Denim, status quo. Let's all wear denim and have long hair, and that's the image. They might be country fops off stage, but on stage and for the audience, they're this, no nonsense, mindless, heads down, no nonsense, mindless boogie thing. But it is all image. Rocking All Over the World, cover version, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's kind of funny that their most well-known song was written by John Fogerty from Creedence.
That's it, yeah. That's just weird when you think of it. Sort of, it's like, well, no, it'd be interesting to. Somebody will probably say, "Oh yeah, such and such a cover version." Somebody's best known song is a cover version. But for that, especially with Live Aid, I mean, opening up with Rocking All Over the World and all that sort of stuff, and it was so people would know what it was. But it's a cover version. Merry Christmas, obviously written by Nod and Jim, just sells, and the fans love it. There's no problems they used to have to play it. I mean, Nod used to have this bit of spiel where he'd come on, and dressed as Father Christmas, and say, "Is there anything rude word you want me to play?" And and that was it. And they normally sort of didn't play it as such. It'd just be a sing along for the crowd. He'd start them off, and that was it. And Don would hit the drum occasionally, but it was just a party thing. And they've done well out of it. They made a few pounds.
And that party thing is something that Slade have done a lot since then. I mean, they did a whole Christmas album.
They did an album called Crackers,
right?
Which is a party thing, and they did Okie Dokie and other songs of that nature, which is what it is. And if you put it isolated and put it on you can guarantee that if you put it on at a party anywhere, people would just jump up and down to it. There'd be no snobbery. Oh, it's Slade. It's a rock band. Why are they doing Okie Dokie? It's a song, and they tear the what's it out of it. They don't hold back. And same album they did Old Lang Syne, which the BBC play every year when the fireworks go off at midnight. Slade, come on. You can't argue with that, people might not know it, but all they hear is Old Lang Syne and Jump Up and Down, whoever, and the fact that it's Slade is a bonus. They're a bit like they're these great unknown bands. So you could argue that Quo are a bit like that. The fans know them, they love them, they buy the album, everything like that. But outside of Caroline and Rocking All Over the World, people say, "No, don't know that one. No, sorry. Paper Plane. Oh yes, I remember Paper Plane. Yeah." the live EP. Was it Gurundala and things like, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But after that, outside of the family, for want of a better word, people won't know, but you go on for Slade thing and put some obscure B-side on, and they'll go, this is fantastic. And it is. You know, but people don't know it.
No. Well, I guess there's always got to be something hidden for the fans, isn't there?
You've got to be able to a little bit of one-upmanship. Be a fan, haven't you? You've got to. So yes, I remember they were blah blah blah. I did this. I bought this, and I was there with the lean years. You know, when did the same with Quo when there were those slump years. Slade had their slump years. Then they got back. Slade did Reading, World War III again. But the 2 years previously, it was the chicken in a basket stuff. You know, it was all the little nightclubs, still hauling all the equipment round that they used, and they didn't change. You know, they didn't change their act when they went to Reading and blew everybody away. They didn't change the act. It was the same act they'd been doing for the last 2 years in Butlins and places like that. But it was the right day, the right crowd, and fantastic. But again, I didn't go because I was doing silly things like working. But you know, life gets in the way. But it's you know, it's just a lot of it's luck with everybody, with Quo. I mean, if Slade hadn't picked Quo up out of the doldrums, take them on tour of them, take them to Australia, show them what sunlight was, and things like that. You know, who knows whatever might happen.
There might be some Quo fans that disagree with that, but there we go.
That's great. You know, it's what it is. You can either it's an argument. I don't know. I mean, it certainly helped. You know, they were. It's like Slade. If Reading hadn't come along, who knows what might have happened if they hadn't got if Quo hadn't got the Slade gig. Who knows what? Because they exposed them to a different audience and things like that. They then went out to Australia again, a different audience. You know, it's what it is. You can't argue with facts.
No, there's nothing like a good live gig though to propel a band, because it happened to Quo a few times. Obviously, they did the NEC in 1982, and I saw this amazing clip on YouTube of Noddy talking about seeing Quo live, and the other people. I want to say Billy Bragg was there. Have you seen this clip?
Don't think so.
And everybody around's kind of like, yeah, 3 chords, whatever. And then Noddy's just sat there like, well, I kind of like the Quo, you know, like that they just do what they do. Yeah. And that's, you know, the crowd are really going for it. Yeah. And everybody else is trying to be positive.
Yeah.
But it's on the verge of like disparaging in some way. You've got to take them for what they are. Both bands were fantastic live bands. They were. You can't argue it. If you were going to go, if you wanted a good time, you either saw Quo, or you went and saw Slade. You went and saw Thin Lizzy. Any of those bands, you know, you could just reel them all off. But that's what they did. They there was no frills. You would just go in there to enjoy yourself. I've often said. There's a lot of people turn up with Slade things with, you know, bootlegs and photographs and song sheets, you know, song lists and everything like that. And I say I fully admire them. I used to go in, get drunk, go and enjoy myself, and try and get home as fast as I could. You know, either train or bus or whatever it was. And that was the for the people to have gone in there with video cameras, and it's different now. I mean, like do the phone, but to go in there with sneak cameras in and get all that sort of thing. Good luck to them, but no, pub first, concert, check what time the train or the bus runs, and hope that they finished early enough to get home.
And it was the Quo. I saw Quo a couple of times, and they were brilliant. Absolutely loved them.
When did you see them?
I saw them first time with Slade at the top rank,
mm-hmm.
and then I saw them at Birmingham Odeon, I think it was. I can't remember what tour it was. It was the classic lineup, and they were just fantastic. I just absolutely loved it because it was at a time Birmingham Odeon were putting 2 or 3 bands a week on. Class band, really good classic bands. You'd look in the back of the Melody Maker, and it'd be tick tick tick. And we used to have an office boy, and we used to give him the time off, give him this bus fare. I said, get to Birmingham, get the tickets, blah blah blah. He'd come back with handfuls of tickets for different bands. So you'd be going 2-3 times a week, and you couldn't hear anything the next morning because you see Quo one night, Thin Lizzy, people to the same band. But you go and see everybody and anybody, Rush, Queen, Rod Stewart, £3.50 to see Rod Stewart and things like that. You couldn't do it now. You couldn't buy a burger at a Rod Stewart concert for £3.
Well, speaking of gigs, there's obviously been a noddy quote taken out of context recently, which by your reaction, I think I know what you're going to say. Is there any chance at all of Slade reuniting at Glastonbury?
I'll say no, owing to the fact that if you read the quote, he mentions partitions between each member of the band and separate sort of transport to get there. I'll say no. Something's going to happen. They're old men. The next available Glastonbury is probably 3 years' time. So they'll all be even older men. And there's no way, I don't think any of them would go up there without wanting to do full bore Slade from 30 years ago. And there's no way that's going to happen. So I'll say no. I'll take an each way bet, but I was with Frank Lee, Jim's brother, earlier today, and we spoke about it, and he just basically said they're old men. They're not going to do it. But you never say never. But I don't think I'd like it. I don't think Glastonbury is the right place to do it. If you're going to do one last gig, do it a little bit more, a bit more accessible. Nothing. I don't know what Glastonbury tickets cost now, but I think it's a silly amount. Go somewhere, a reasonable sized venue where you can spend 20-30 quid on a ticket. Give the fans what they want. That's that's the best way of doing it. So, and
the thing is, the Quo had this same situation where it looked like the classic lineup were never going to get back together.
Yeah,
and then 2011-12, the documentary happens. Then a reunion. Then we have the reunion tours of 13 and 14 with the Frantic Four plus Bob Young. Yeah. These are things that people never thought would happen, and thank goodness they happened when they did, because obviously only a couple of years after the last tour, Rick Parfitt passed away, and now obviously Alan Lancaster, so it can never be repeated. So we can say, to quote a Quo song from 2002, never say never on this. But for now, I think you are right in what you say, that I guess Noddy hasn't really toured or done anything, has he, in that time? And I guess what people would be expecting, as you say, is like the Noddy of 30-40 years ago, being really kind of loud and stuff. And he can do that because every year people ask him to shout it's Christmas. But there's a difference between shouting it's Christmas for a few seconds and then spending 2 hours playing his old set.
You've got to be match fit, haven't you? You've got to be match fit. You can't, I don't know what you do the voice thing. Jim occasionally plays in anger and he can do it. Dave obviously still goes out. Don has got back to fitness, but you've got a Nod's voice, which is sort of the integral part if that's got to be match fit, and if that's not match fit, it's not Slade. It's sad. I mean, there's lots of things. Go out and do an acoustic tour, but you can't see Slade are not an acoustic band. You know, it's got to be balls to the wall or nothing. And I think that's, you know, so I think they've done well. They've got a lot of publicity, and it makes a change from the Merry Christmas chats. You know, it's gone viral. All the magazines have picked up on it. There's all and ignored the denials. Nod's denied it. Don's denied it. But matter, you know.
Well, like every band from a certain era, there's always a good tribute band out there that does the material.
Yeah. There's quite a few Slade ones, and Dave still goes out and plays Slade songs with his band. So that, you know, they feel the need that there is, but I don't think so. I'll say no again. I'll say no.
Well, we'll draw this to a close, but if there are any Quo fans listening that are perhaps they're not Slade fans, or they've heard a little bit, but they want something to get into, what would you recommend as kind of a beginner's thing for getting into Slade's?
Probably Slade
music?
Alive. Slade Live's the easy one. Play it loud. That was the album before. That's a bit of a giveaway, having an album called Play It Loud. But Slade Alive, put it on, turn it up, listen to Jim's bass and Nod's voice, and just everything just shred. They'll just shred everything away that you've and just dance about. A few cover versions on it, but it's very loud, very noisy, very simple. You know, probably what they said. Probably what the same thing as leveled as Status Quo. You know, it's very loud, very noisy, very simple. But you can have a lot of fun. You don't need to be clever.
And when did they release that live album?
72.
Mm-hmm.
It's still 50 years.
I mean, from what I gather from listening to a lot of the studio stuff, Don's drums really pierce through that mix.
Yeah. He sort of just loud, really loud drummer. He's sort of there was never any pretense. He was sort of he's just a natural drummer. I've asked him, you know, did he have lessons? He said no. He did the Boy Scout or Boys Brigade. And so he learned the very rudimentary things. But once he just stood behind sat behind the drums and just went for it. And he heads down again and just sort of cracked everybody, wasn't it? And they just turned everything up to 10. They had lots of clever things with the amplifiers. The idea was at the beginning that they had 3 lead guitarists. So Nod and Dave rhythm, and Jim was playing lead guitar and bass as well, and you can hear it. There's lots of little things, but if you take it on face value and just put your headphones on, or you look and turn it up full, and don't upset the neighbours, and you'll listen to a live album from 50 years ago. God, that's mad. 50 years is half as it's a different time. But they couldn't do it. They had the 3 nights in a studio. It's not in front of it's in front of an audience, but it's not, you know, a concert hall as such or a theatre as such. It was in Command Studios, and everybody got in for free. And it's excellent. It's a good album. The cover's nice as well. Got things to look at. Excellent.
Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast, Chris. Your book with Ian Edmondson, The Noize, that's Noize, the Slade Discography, is available in hardcover and paperback from Amazon. From it's all over the world, isn't it?
Yeah, Amazon. Yeah, you can buy it, and they convert it to whatever it is. I hope I've not upset too many Status Quo fans.
No, it's fine. It's just great. It's just great to talk about Slade and the various kind of crossovers that have been over the years, because there are, and I'm sure, have you ever been on any other sort of podcast talking about Slade before? Or is this the first
This is the first one. It's quite strange, not pushing the buttons or the button, sort of, because I normally do them with Don, and we sort of either talk to each other or we get somebody on like Alan and John and Francis, and we've hopefully do some more. We've done a couple with Andy Scott from the Suite, which are quite interesting. Gay bar talk's quite good. It's a start finish. Lord knows what we've got in the middle. But no, this is the first time. Yeah, this is the first time.
Well, I shall leave all the links in the description and say thank you, Chris, for appearing on the podcast.
Thank you, Jamie. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.